welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm part of the English faculty here at Brookdale, where I direct the creative writing program. On our show today, I'm so excited to have fiction writer Victor LaValle. Victor is the author of 4 books, the first one being a short story collection called Slap Boxing with Jesus, and then also The Ecstatic, Big Machine, and his recent book, Devil in Silver. He teaches at Columbia University, and we are so happy to have you on the show.
It's good to be here.
So I wanted to just kind of ask you about your writing and how you came to writing, at a young age, an older age.
Well, the way that I came to writing, frankly, is that I was a weird kid who grew up in a chaotic house, and I really needed a way to have a little time to myself, a little safety and all that stuff. And it was either run outside with my boys and play, which I love to do, but also just to pick up books and just read. And the thing that I was drawn to sort of obsessively was horror in particular. And maybe because of some of the things going on in the house, that's what I was drawn to, but that was it. And but the nice thing about that, this was in the late 70s, early 80s, which was like this horror boom. Stephen King, Peter Straub, Clive Barker.
I remember Peter Straub.
Yeah. And so you could get those things at a supermarket, at a pharmacy, and the covers at the time were not too lurid, so I could fool my mother into buying them for me. And so that's what I did. And then I would just read those obsessively, and after that, moved into writers like Shirley Jackson and H.P. Lovecraft and Ambrose Bierce and on and on and on. But that was the beginning of me being a writer.
And when did you actually start writing your own stories then? Did you always write stories?
No, I would say the first time I started writing, I was probably 14 or something like that. And I remember this. I was 14 and I wrote a story that was a rip-off of probably a Clive Barker story. He was a British horror writer. And I sent it into a magazine called Gru magazine that was on the Lower East Side of New York City. And they rejected it, but at the bottom of the rejection letter, the editor-in-chief wrote an auspicious first story from someone so young, because I had said I was 14. And that was enough. It made me feel like, okay, I looked up auspicious, it's a positive thing, and then if she says that, then I must be doing all right. And then I would say for about a year or so, then I wrote more and more stories, and then puberty really hit, and I started running after girls. But
stories took a hiatus for a while.
Stories took about 3 years off, I think. But nonetheless, that really was the beginning of the writing, and I never forgot that rejection, that very, very kind rejection.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah,
that's incredible. And now you're at Columbia University, where you teach, and where you also went to graduate school.
Where
correct?
I did, yes, that's right.
Did you find when you got to Columbia that a community of writers was important to you?
Well, what happened was I failed out of undergrad. I got booted out of school, basically, and clawed my way back in by basically reapplying to get in when the dean, who told me he would never allow me back into school, went on a sabbatical. Yeah, and snuck back in, and then hurried and graduated.
Were you paying attention, waiting for him to step away?
I was waiting for him. Yeah, I got a job, and I spent about 5 months just waiting till summer hit. I knew he was going away, and I reapplied, and there was another dean who didn't know me and didn't loathe me. And so she said, yeah, you can come back, I don't care. And then I got in and I finished up in a semester and a half. But because of that, I really came out of my undergrad experience feeling kind of like I had failed to do anything with that time. And so when I went into the grad program, in a way, it didn't actually matter to me if people were nice, if people were not nice. I really felt like this was my last shot to do something. Because I had messed up everything as I saw it before. And then I got there, and it turned out, almost everyone in one way or another felt like, I'm just trying this because I don't know, this is the thing I love, and also I don't have that many other choices. I have to do this. And I was shocked to find, oh, okay, I'm not the only one.
Who feels that way.
Who feels that way, yeah. And that became part of the sense of community. And that, I feel like that's a part of the writer's sort of mindset in general. So.
That's wonderful. Now, Slap Boxing, with Jesus is your first book, correct?
First book, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a collection of these wonderful kind of interconnected short stories.
Yeah.
And could you kind of talk about the book, what the book is about to a certain extent, and kind of how it came into being?
Sure. So I started working on those stories when I was at Columbia, and frankly,
As part of the grad program?
As part of the grad program, and not that what ended up in this is the same exactly, but it was the beginning of writing those stories, and I felt like I would read books about childhood, people's childhood, pictures of childhood, and they always just seemed fake to me because they were so nice. And the kids were so nice. They didn't curse. They weren't mean to each other. They weren't cruel to people that they loved. And more importantly, they weren't human, I thought.
They were all like happy Walton's families.
They were happy kids, or like at the end of it all, even if they were a little unhappy, they always learned a lesson from some kind grandpa or something like that. And I just didn't understand that picture of childhood. And I was still close enough to that time, at least in my mind, that I felt I have a different picture of childhood I'd like to paint. And it was a childhood of most of the kids in my neighborhood in Flushing, Queens. The parents were a lot of the parents were immigrants, or a lot of the parents, they were single parents, and so a lot of people were working. The parents were working, and it meant that the kids, frankly, were raising themselves for great parts of the day in the evenings. And this made for great love and camaraderie. And as with kids, when they're left alone, a lot of violence and pain inflicted on each other. And yet, when I think back on my childhood, I think of it as a beautiful childhood, like a wonderful childhood, even with all the harshness that might have been there, because there was lots of good too. And so I wanted to write stories about that kind of childhood, and put that in literature, or at least my little part of it from Queens, in literature.
It's funny because my students have read some of the stories from that, and Chuckie in particular was one of the stories that it just got them talking so much, because it's this story of this boy who's faced with a decision that he has to make, and they were so surprised that he does not do, necessarily the right thing.
Yes.
There's this fight,
Yes.
and he has a choice of going to help this kid who he sort of knows, but is kind of part of his gang, or not. And they kept holding on to that, but he didn't go help him.
Yes.
And I think that speaks to what you're saying about this idea that it's always going to have a happy ending. He's always going to go save the boy.
Yes.
But he doesn't, and that story really resonated with them.
I mean, I'm very happy. That one I find in particular, there is a way that the moral choice is really clear. And as you say, it really bothers folks. Because, I mean, we're all taught, especially, like, I have 2 little kids, we tell them, be good, share, don't bully the other kids at the preschool, at the daycare and everything. And then they just go in and like snatch toys, kick over other kids. They're kids, And the picture we have, like when we, sometimes I find when I talk to parents in particular, like if I'm at a high school or something, or junior high school or college, and they've read the stories with their kids, the parents are actually sometimes even more hurt or offended than the kids.
I can see that, yeah.
And in a way, it's sort of like, but you're not supposed to give that kind of example to the kids. And my feeling is like, I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
I'm just setting it down.
I'm just reflecting.
I'm just, and just talking about like the way that all of us would like to be good people all the time. But if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we fail. But that there's wisdom in admitting to that failure.
And one of the interesting things in the classroom discussion, too, is how many students were like, no, he did the right thing.
That's funny, too.
So we all knew who to stand next to in a fight in the future.
That's right. Although the funny thing is, just because someone says in class that they would help, does not mean they would help.
And just because someone says they won't doesn't mean...
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. It's that idea of like, you don't know who you are until you're put to the test.
Yeah. One of the other things that we were talking a lot about was the style of the story. It's very fast. It feels very cinematic. Like, you're just watching this sort of group of kids morph and move down the streets and go through their day. And it's very dialogue driven, but there's no quotation marks. And I wondered how you were playing with style in this first collection, and how your style has evolved as a writer over the course of the other books.
Well, so that this first book, a few things. I was definitely trying to sound exactly like I still remembered how we talked as kids. And along with, there's some other writers who do the same thing. Certainly there's Junot Diaz with Drown. There's Sherman Alexie did it with a book called Lone Ranger and Tonto, Fist Fight in Heaven. A little bit older, there's a guy named Abraham Rodriguez who had a book called A Boy Without a Flag that was about like kids in the Bronx, and it was came out in like the 80s. And this idea of like capturing the sound of children, I mean, you can say the same for like Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, that like capturing that sound and the way the kids talk and talk to each other, there's something beautiful about it if you can get it, because it usually is fast, doesn't always make sense, but in a weird way altogether it makes sense, you know? And I wanted to get that down. And I thought it was beautiful and sort of lyrical and poetic.
It is. It's the story. That one in particular reads so well out loud.
Thanks.
Because you just hear it.
Yeah.
I promised my students I'd ask though, why no quotation marks? Some of them really were like, why are there
why
no
is he not doing this? Yeah, yeah.
And I had my theories, but I told him I'd ask it.
Well, so there's two. So at the time when I got, so as I said, I wasn't from a household that read all that much. So I was coming up the ranks through Stephen King and Shirley Jackson and all this stuff. And so I didn't come to James Joyce until graduate school. And I read Dubliners, which was his depiction of his hometown, basically, and fell in love. And I felt like this is a kindred spirit. He's doing the same thing, showing the high and the low and all that. And he didn't have quote marks. He just had dashes. And so I just said, I'm just going to steal that, because all good artists steal. Right?
Yeah.
So that's what I should do. And then if I'm totally honest, it also was because I was a little pretentious. And I wanted
James
people to,
Joyce isn't pretentious.
Well, I mean, at least he coined, maybe he didn't invent dashes, but he certainly used them early, you know. And I think there was a way too that I said, like, if I do what James Joyce does, I'll be serious like James Joyce is, right?
I think that's called like, that's one of the drawbacks of grad school.
Yes, and of just general insecurity.
But I think also it moves it along. It picks up the speed. That was my theory, actually. In part that it's just like, this is so fast. This is just, we're moving, things are shifting, and the quotation marks would just, it would define it too clearly. You know, stop, start, stop, start.
And it would also, I mean, frankly, the other thing is, I know, even in a book I love, sometimes it just, you're in a hurry, you just got to jump through the dialogue. Just jump to the dialogue. And if there's no dashes, I also thought to myself, you force the reader.
You have to read it.
To read it. You got to read everything, you know?
Oh, that's good. We're going to have to take a break, but I'm talking with Victor LaValle. Please join us after the break.
My daughter was born premature, and the hospital's respiratory therapist saved her life. When the economy crashed, we moved back to New Jersey for my husband's career, but nobody was hiring drama teachers. So I joined the respiratory therapy program at Brookdale. It's a great field with job security, and you can be there for people who really need you. My name is Joriel Miller, and I came to Brookdale to change my career. I never imagined I could help save a life.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writer Series. I'm Suzanne Parker, Director of the Creative Writing Program, and I am very happy to be here today talking with Victor LaValle. Before the break, we were talking about Slapboxing with Jesus, which is this great story, collection of short stories. But your next 3 books were all novels. Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, why the shift?
Well, I would say, if I'm honest like this, the first novel was not really a novel, I realize now. It was actually a series of stories about the same people. I was trying to just teach myself how to write a novel, having written stories first. And I just thought, like, if I write 20 stories that are 20 pages long with the same people in them, that's a novel. And
was that actually the task you gave
that was
yourself?
Actually how
20 stories, 20 pages,
and each
same
one,
people?
like, so, and also like that each one would sort of move us forward a little bit, you know. So then when it came out, very generously, it was described as a picaresque novel, but another way to say it is like it's sort of a novel. Like,
so you don't think of it as a novel then?
I mean, I love it. I'm very proud of it, you know. But I also, I see the ways that V.S. Naipaul said once, every book is just practice for the next book. And so I like that idea of like, I look, like at the time, that was the best I could do. And I always tell this to my students, you just do the best you could do at the time. And then you hope that a little bit later, a week later, a year later, you can look back and say, oh, I see the things that could have been better. And that's what I'm going to put into the next book. You know, so now I look back on it, and at the time I knew it was a novel, and I was very proud of it as a novel.
Sure.
And now I look at it and I say, I'm still very proud of it, and it's a novel in stories. Yeah, and that the next one, Big Machine, I consider like really my first novel.
Was it Anthony? It's Anthony James, the character you pick up from Slapboxing, and then who's in The Ecstatic.
That's right. Yeah.
Was he then the thing that kind of got you going on the next on The Ecstatic?
Well, I would say the first two books, Slapboxing and The Ecstatic, were just both incredibly autobiographical books. And so Slapboxing was about Anthony when he was a kid, and then no surprise, The Ecstatic was about Anthony in his 20s. Yeah, and then after that I had run out of years, so now I had to actually start making up stories.
Making stuff up.
That's right. That's right.
Well, then let's talk about Big Machine then, which you say you think of as your first novel. Then.
Yeah.
What is the difference then between writing these short stories or these linked novel-esque short stories and something that is something like Big Machine?
Well, on the most like mechanical level, I would say the thing that I started to think about was that like with a story, you ask a question on say page 1, and by page 5 or 10 or 20, you answer that question. So
is that how you think of it?
That's
though?
how I think of it. So
in
like
the process?
Yeah,
Do you literally have a question in your head?
No, more like in like I write the first draft and then I look back and I say, what was the question? So in Chuckie, the question really was just, will he help or won't he? And so it's a short story because that's a very simple answer. So in 6 pages, yes, no just comes up as the answer, you know. But if it's 1 page or 20 pages, I look back and I think like, okay, that's what that's for me personally, that's what I'm trying to do with this. But with a novel, I think of it as you bring up a question on page 1, but you're not going to answer that question until page 300. So you need to come up with some other questions after that first one, so people will not just say, just answer question number 1, do you know? And question number 1 usually should be a big question. So in Big Machine, the question is, will the main character, Ricky Rice, will he ever get his life together, right? But, you know, I could just say, well, kinda, you know, but then that's a 2-page novel. But instead if I say, well, before I tell you that, let me tell you about this day he got a mysterious letter. And the letter invited him up to northeastern Vermont. And then let me tell you what it was like on the bus. And let me tell you what happened when he got there. And all of a sudden, question after question after question is put forth to you. What do you think happened on the bus? What do you think happened when he got there? Who is this secret organization he's joining? Who is this guy? And then really it's not till the last page that I actually answer that question, will he get his life together? But so many other wild and interesting, hopefully, questions have come up since now and then that you've almost forgotten that was actually the thing you were wondering about.
The first question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. So this comes for you in the process of revision, more
Yes.
so.
Yes.
Is this what's driving a first draft too? Is it conscious at that level?
No, I would say in the first draft, it's just more like I have an idea or a character or an image even, a moment that I feel like I'm obsessed with, and I just sit down and write that out, and then I say get to the end of 5 pages or 12 pages, and I just don't feel done with it, and so I keep going forward, and then after I have 100 pages, maybe I realize, oh, I need the 50 pages before that first moment. And then it starts to build and build and build. And even then, sometimes, frankly, I realize, oh, this actually still is just a story. But it was the story was in that first 50 pages. I needed to write all the rest to learn it. And then I just take 10 pages out of that, and that's the story. And then another time, that 150 pages is not enough. And I say, I need 400 pages. And
So you never, when you're sitting down, you don't necessarily know if you're moving towards a short story or if I have this novel idea.
Yeah, I don't really, it's like it could be a story, a novella, or a novel. It has yet to be, I've never thought this is multiple books yet, but who knows. But yeah, I can't, if I try to plan it out too much, I kill all the inventiveness. and the joy for me. So it's not possible for me to be that sort of precise.
Clear when you
Yeah.
start.
And in fact, because the truth is also sometimes I don't even understand why an idea is sort of making me obsessed. And I have to write everything out to learn the reason. And that might take 500 pages or it might take 5. And that will determine the size of the thing.
Sure,
You know.
sure. I have friends of mine who are writers as well and who tend to overwrite. For every 100 pages that they have,
Yeah.
they've actually got 300 pages
Yeah.
and they cut a couple hundred.
Yeah.
And something that you said kind of made me think that, do you tend to write a lot more and then pare down a lot?
I tend to write I write a lot more and throw out, just throw out this or that. Sometimes I write and go down I follow like a plot line that I think is interesting, and then I have to realize at a certain point, this is actually not interesting to anyone but me. And so I cut that 50 pages and go back to the place where I had originally veered off and start writing from there. But I would say definitely for every book, there's another book's worth that is just trash. Not trash, that is, a file on the computer that just says, I call them graveyards. Each book has its own graveyard.
I like that.
Yeah, so.
But I think that's important for people to hear too.
Yeah.
Because I think people are wary of cutting and
That's right.
giving themselves permission to say, no, this isn't working.
That's right.
This isn't working.
You can be afraid of. There's two things there, right? Like one is, you've already done this much work, and it's exhausted you, and you've been cutting time out of your life to do this. Will you tell me I got to do more work to write the same thing again? It's just on one level just exhausting. So I can understand that. Yeah. And then on the other side, I think is. At least for me, some people have this idea of like your first thought is your best thought, but that's, I would just say, wrong.
No.
It's your fifth thought is your best thought, or something, because your first thought usually is a cliche.
It's the obvious one.
It's the obvious one. And you need 3 or 4 times before you kind of get to your real individual way of describing a person's face, a sky, a character, and then people say like, oh, that's the other thing that I find sometimes in class I'll bring in, if I can find them, like writers' earlier drafts of their stories or opening chapters, because the mistake people also make is when they see a book on the book stand, they think the author just wrote it this way. Like this is just the way it was, and if I don't do that, then I must not be as good a writer. But in fact, that person, you don't know, that person went through 50 drafts.
Yeah.
And I almost guarantee you they didn't just go through one. I mean, unless they're a liar. Short of that, they did multiple things, but you won't see that. And you can beat yourself up thinking, I should be as good as them.
Yeah.
And you probably already are.
Yeah.
But, you are in the sense that if you're willing to keep going, keep doing it.
It's like a painter. You can't see all the layers that went underneath it and how many times they whited it out and started again.
That's right.
We only have a few more minutes, but I do want to talk about your absolutely wonderful newest book, The Devil in Silver.
Oh, yeah.
So can you maybe kind of just talk about the story of it, what it's about?
Sure. So the main character is a guy named Pepper, who's a full-time furniture mover, who's got a little bit of a temper. He's a big guy who has a good heart but doesn't always express it in the best way. And one day he's defending a woman that he likes very much, he believes, and gets into a fight with her ex-husband, her abusive ex-husband. And but when he's fighting with this abusive ex-husband, these 3 guys just come up on him and he starts fighting with them too. And it turns out that they're undercover cops. And just in general, you just cannot punch undercover cops in the face. You just can't. And so through some red tape issues, they take him not to jail. They take him to the New Hyde Mental Hospital. And they put him in there for a 72-hour hold, which means he's in there no matter what for 3 days. He's not mentally ill. He's never been mentally ill, but he's stuck in there for that time. And his first reaction is the reaction of most people, I think, if they were in that situation, is horror and get me out of here, get me away from these kinds of people. And it's only made worse when one of the patients, the oldest one there, a woman named Dory, tells him, not only is this a terrible place, the devil lives here and he's killing us.
We're on our last minute of the show, but
I can
it's a
stop there.
perfect,
Yeah, I can
perfect
stop there.
teaser spot. And there is actually
And there is something's killing them. Yes.
Yeah. So kind of quickly as we close out, do you consider yourself, if you can say it in 15 seconds or less, a horror or a kind of a speculative fiction writer or something like that?
I'm aspiring to be one.
And you're an incredible. Right. Devil in Silver is a book you cannot put down.
Thank you.
Yeah, it gives you chills, but at the same time, there's a huge heart in the book, and you love these characters, and the characters are more important than the scare effect.
I appreciate it.
I highly recommend it. All of your books are wonderful.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for being
It was
on
a pleasure.
the show.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being on the show. You've been watching the Visiting Writers Series show, and if you'd like to know more about Brookdale's creative writing program, please do check us out online at www.brookdalecc.org. Brookdalecc.edu, sorry. And thanks for watching.